Elvis had been part of my life for 18 years. We met when I had just turned 14. The first 6 months I spent with him were filled with tenderness and affection. Blinded by love, I saw none of his faults or weaknesses. He was to become the passion of my life. He taught me everything: how to dress, how to walk, how to apply makeup and wear my hair, how to behave, how to return love his way. Over the years, he became my father, husband, and very nearly God. Hello, and thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about the new Sofia Coppola movie Priscilla, which was released in 2023. And I'm comparing it with the book it is based on, the Priscilla Presley memoir Elvis and Me, which was released in 1985, and Priscilla Presley, wrote it with the help of Sandra Harmon. And of course, this is about Priscilla Presley's relationship with Elvis Presley. And I'm just going to get right into the details and how the movie differs from the true story as told in Priscilla's memoir, beginning with Priscilla in high school. So the book actually begins with Priscilla finding out that Elvis has died. And then from there, we go back to the past to when she is in high school in Texas. And she shares a story about how she was a candidate for the school election that was happening. And she was running against a friend of hers. And so she says how the friendship meant more to her than winning this election did. And she also didn't want to be part of the election in the first place. But she is feels sure she will not win. However, when the day comes and they announce the winner, Priscilla does win, and her family is out in the audience. And so when she goes to give her acceptance speech, she didn't have anything prepared, and she just apologizes, and that's basically her speech. And I was kind of confused why she felt the need to share this story, but I guess it kind of demonstrates her modesty and her lack of confidence and her shyness, as well as highlighting how ashamed she felt for embarrassing her father in that she won but then didn't have anything prepared, and then she didn't have a speech and she didn't know what to say. And so maybe that it's foreshadowing to the people pleasing side of her, and how when she was dating Elvis, how she wanted to please him and not disappoint him. So I'm assuming that's my guess onto why this story was told, but that's a story that is told early on in the book but is not in the movie. Also in the book, we find out that around this time, Priscilla finds out that her father is not her biological father. So her biological dad had died in World War II when she was a baby. And then when the mom remarried this new guy, he adopted Priscilla. And then throughout all of her life, he just treated her like his own child. But again, this detail is not in the movie. The movie begins with them living in Germany because her father is in the military and they have been transferred there. She often hangs out alone at this military cafe. And some guy walks up to her one day, asking her name, and he's like, hey, I know Elvis Presley, and if you want to meet him, I can take you over there. I hang out with him all the time. And this guy convinces Priscilla's parents to let him take her to meet Elvis. And so she goes and she meets Elvis. And then after that, the guy calls again being hey, Elvis really liked you and he wants to see you again. So she ends up going to visit Elvis a number of times during the following months. And at a certain point, Priscilla's parents are hey, if Elvis is wanting to see you this much, we want to meet him, to make sure, he's a trustworthy guy or whatever. And so Elvis comes over and meets her parents, and he's able to win them over to some extent. He's very respectful. However, when they ask him why are you so interested in our daughter? She's 14 years old, you're 24, 25, why aren't you with a grown woman? They don't phrase it like that, but they do ask why are you interested in our daughter? And he tells them the age old, oh, she's so mature for her age. Which honestly, if you are young and an older guy says that to you, run for the hills, because 9 times out of 10, they are not interested in you for your emotional maturity. They are interested in you because you were young and you are naive. So that's that phrase, I would say, is a huge red flag. But regardless, that is what Elvis tells the parents, and they like him and they allow Priscilla to continue to see him. They also know that Elvis only has a few more months left in Germany and then he flies back to America. So they also kind of think that this is only going to last for so long and then it'll be over anyway. And yeah, Elvis, he is 10 years older than Priscilla. So they met when she was 14. He was 24. And in the movie, the two lead performances are great. However, there's only 1 year difference between the two of them. So I kind of think that they should have got someone older to play Elvis. That way, that age difference would be highlighted more. Granted, Jacob Elordi, I think is how you say his last name, he plays Elvis, and he is very tall. So I feel that height difference kind of adds to the power dynamic. I will say they do a good job at making her look young and sweet and naive at the start, but even so, yeah, I just feel like they should have got someone who like was clearly older than her, you know? But over the following months while she sees him in Germany, they will kiss, but it never goes beyond that. And he is just like very vulnerable around her, and he opens up about like his dreams and his struggles. And she is, of course, captivated by him. Like, he's handsome, he's talented, he's charming, he's fun, and he's just like the life of the party, right? Like, whenever he is around, he is the center of attention and everybody loves him. And of course, she's going to just be lured in to this life and to this man. And I thought throughout the course of the movie, like, you know, when she is still enamored with him, I thought the movie did a great job at just showing like how captivating and how magnetic he was. And yeah, as a teenager, like, of course you were going to fall head over heels over this guy and get caught up in the whirlwind that is his life, you know? But anyway, eventually he does have to leave Germany, and he tells her to stay exactly the way she is, you know, innocent and pure, like, i.e. like stay a virgin. She promises she will, and he promises he won't forget her. And he tells her just like how important it is that for the girl he chooses to be committed to him, right? Which is very hypocritical because he expects fidelity from the person he is with, even though he himself has all of these affairs and is always cheating on whatever woman he is currently with. But he will not tolerate that from the girl he is with. But yeah, so she is 14 at this time, and through the following 2 years, they like write letters here and there and communicate to some extent, but not really. And it's not until she is 16 that he calls and he wants her to fly to Memphis over the Christmas holiday, and eventually they are able to convince her parents to let her do this. And when they were in Germany, he had given her pills to help her stay awake at school because she would be staying up late seeing him. And then when she is in Memphis with him over this Christmas break, he gives her a pill to go to sleep, and it knocks her out for 2 whole days. And this is in both book and movie. But in both, like, yeah, just being around Elvis, she got hooked on these pills as well, like these like uppers and downers and things. And so she's doing that a lot when she's with him in Memphis. And also while they're in Memphis, they then go to Las Vegas, where again, they're just like partying it up. And she is dressing very sophisticated for her age and wearing all of this makeup. And then also during this trip in the book, they are playing some of his new records. And she says like, oh, like, why don't you have any songs like Jailhouse Rock? Like, that one was so good. And he gets very upset and he yells at her being like, hey, like, I'm already getting enough opinions. I don't need you. Like, what do you know? And he storms out and he slams the door. And this is the first time that his anger was aimed towards her. And she's just like very shocked by this experience. And this specific outburst is not in the movie. But yeah, overall, she has a great visit with him and she is very reluctant to go back home, but eventually she does, and she cries the whole flight back. And so when her parents show up to pick her up, she just has makeup streaked down her face. And then, shortly after, when she's like 17, she's in her senior year of school, and she asks her parents if she can just move in with Elvis, and they have found like a Catholic school in Memphis by Graceland that she can attend. And so they promise like, oh, we'll be so responsible. She'll stay in school. She'll graduate. Like, you don't need to worry about her. Like, she'll be good. And Elvis has a lot of his family staying at Graceland, like his grandma and his dad and just like all of these people. And so he's like, don't worry, we'll take good care of her and I love her and yada, yada, yada. Long story short, the parents say yes. But she shows up to Graceland and Elvis is often gone because he's shooting movies and things. And again, the movie just highlights how like bored and lonely and like empty life is when Elvis isn't there and she's just kind of walking around Graceland. And he buys her a puppy, which she spends time with. There's like some women who are nice to her, but there's also women who just kind of like see her as this like young outsider interloper, right? And there's all these comments about how young she is. And so yeah, she just doesn't really fit in. And even when Elvis does come home, there's a scene in the movie where they're sitting around a table eating and it's also lively and fun now that Elvis is back. But we see her, the camera focuses on her and you can tell she just feels out of place. Like she loves being around him and around, this energy, and she wants to fit in, but she doesn't really, But in both book and movie, Elvis will talk about different co-stars such as like Anne Margaret, who he says they put their career before their man. And he's like, yeah, like that doesn't fly with me. Like I need to be number one in the woman's life. And she even tells him at one point when he's away, she's saying how she doesn't have like anything to do. And so she's like, yeah, I thought I would get an after school job at like this beauty salon. But he tells her like, no, like I need you to be around. Like when you call, you need to be there. So basically like you cannot have a life outside of me. So no, you can't get a job. And then he also in book and movie, there's another part where he's talking about a co-star and how like, her body was like so big and manly in a way, and how like he's just kind of making fun of her for it.
And here's a picture of the actress who he said had a body like a man.
And then there's another scene scene in book and movie where she and Elvis are having like this playful pillow fight, but then she ends up hitting him like harder than he expected. And so he hits her back hard and he gets mad at her being like, like, don't hit like a man. Like, I don't want my woman to be like a man. And then the movie also has another scene where this is, a few years later, he's playing some records and he asks her opinion. And in the book, she says like, I've been with him for years now. And she remembers Vegas when she gave her opinion and he got mad. But she's like, well, we've been together for years now. I think he wants my honest opinion. So she tells him like, oh, I don't like it. And this is in the movie as well. But the movie didn't have the first instance. They just have this time. Anyway, she tells him that she doesn't like the record. And then he gets very upset and he throws a chair against the wall. But yeah, throughout this time, she is still very in love with Elvis and she's just enjoying the roller coaster that is this relationship. They have these highs where she's just so in love with him and he's amazing and he's so fun. And so, like I said, just so charismatic. But then at the same time, there's these lows where, his anger flares up. But throughout all of this, they are not having like full intercourse. And she wants to, especially once they've been together for a while. She's like, okay, come on, like I have needs. But he's like, no, like we can't. I will decide when it's time. And yeah, along with his anger, we also see, I think maybe, in book and movie, but in the book, we also see how he does this with like everybody, how he can be manipulative in a way where he'll like lavish on praise, but then at the same time, like he can get so angry at people. And so it makes people like want so bad to just please him, right? Because when you're in his good graces, it's like amazing. And so you do whatever you can to keep him happy, even if it means you're unhappy. And Priscilla is obviously very affected by this and she's so young and impressionable. So she just goes along with what he wants. And we have a scene that reminded me of Vertigo where he's having her try on different clothes and he wants her to dye her hair and dress like this and wear more makeup. And he's like molding her into who he wants her to be. But eventually she does graduate high school and we see how this is very difficult because, she's kind of living the party life. And the reason she is able to graduate in both book and movie is she sits next to a girl when they're taking a test and she tells her like, hey, if you let me cheat off of you, then you can meet Elvis. And of course she wants to meet Elvis. So the girl lets Priscilla cheat off of her. But when she has her graduation ceremony, I thought it was a cute scene. It's from the book as well, but I thought it was just like cute and fun in the movie where she has Elvis wait outside of the ceremony because she feels like it'll be too distracting and people won't care about the graduates if Elvis is in the crowd. So he's waiting outside and then when she comes out, all of the nuns are gathered around Elvis like getting his picture. And so that was a cute scene and she officially graduates. And then from here in the book, we read about how Priscilla got really into horses and Elvis also got into it. And so he bought horses for like his whole entourage, but Graceland wasn't big enough for all of their horses now. So then they bought a ranch and they moved all the horses to the ranch and they spent a ton of time there. And Priscilla says how like they could have turned that ranch into something that was like profitable because it had like all of what you needed. It was huge. It had everything you needed to make a profit, but how Vernon just wasn't good at managing Elvis's finances and he didn't like getting outside advice. So basically they didn't make any money off that ranch. But yeah, and she says how this is like one of the times where Elvis was just like so happy. And also around this time, Elvis started talking to this like spiritual guru guy named Larry and he introduced him to like just all these books like, spiritual metaphysics type books or whatever. And he expects Priscilla to be very into these books, right? Because he's very controlling and he expects her to be into whatever he's into. And so he wants her to be into these books, but she just like finds it so boring and mind numbing and is just like, I can't take this. And she also says in the book that there are times during this period when Elvis would like claim to like see things in the sky or like see angels and things. And then he's like, oh, like the angels want to talk to me. Let me go walk over to them. And Priscilla says how years later she talked to, Elvis's crew being like, was he having a nervous breakdown when that happened? But she determines that she doesn't think he was having a nervous breakdown, but rather he was just like very depressed and bored. And so he was just messing with them in this way, which I just said he was at his happiest when he had the horses. So this stuff with Larry had happened beforehand. And then it was after the stuff with Larry, they end up getting into horses, I believe. But anyway, obviously Elvis was just a very moody person and had highs and had low lows. He was also on a ton of pills, right? And all these things that doctors were giving him that they shouldn't have been. But anyway, in both book and movie, Priscilla expresses, because yet they still have not like officially consummated their love. And so she tells him like, I have needs, but he sees like, oh, like I need to stay away from, the flesh. And also like, you're a virgin. So I just want to be really careful about when we officially, do something. And she's just like, man, like that is a lot to ask of someone. We've been together for years now. Like, come on. But eventually in the book, he like falls and he gets a concussion. And then Colonel Parker uses his concussion as an opportunity to be like, you know what, you need to get rid of Larry, this spiritual guy, and get rid of all these books, and things just need to go back to the way they were. And in the book, he also asks Priscilla, like, do you want me to get rid of these books? And she's like, yes. And so then they burn them. Whereas in the movie, she's telling him how she hates these books, but he doesn't get rid of them until Colonel Tom Parker calls up and tells him to get rid of them. And so then he does. But also during this time, he would also have like Bible reading classes with all of these like women, you know, these sexy ladies who would sit around listening to him. And they would flirt with him and he would flirt back, even though Priscilla was like right there. And obviously during this time, he was also like having all these different affairs and gaslighting Priscilla about it. So yeah, just like an emotional roller coaster of a relationship. However, eventually when Priscilla is 21, they eventually do get married. And once married, they do officially consummate their love. And Priscilla very soon becomes pregnant. And she is like excited, but she's also just like, she's not ready to be pregnant, right? She's still so young and there's still so much life she wants to live with Elvis. And she's like, this is going to change everything. And in the book, Elvis tells her like, I will support your decision on whatever you decide to do. But ultimately, you know, she tells him that she can't bear the thought of getting rid of his child. And so she keeps the baby and Lisa Marie is born. And we kind of see this in the movie, like where she's stepping on a scale and things. But in the book, she was like determined to gain as little weight as possible. And, you know, she wanted to keep her good looks. And even when she started going into labor before they go to the hospital in both book and movie, she puts on a full face of makeup. And we don't see Lisa Marie being born in the movie, but I really wish the movie would have included that like tender, loving scene. And in the book, it reads, "The man in my hospital room that day was the man I loved and will always love. He didn't have to try to be strong and decisive or sexy. He wasn't afraid to show his warmth or vulnerability. He didn't have to act the part of Elvis Presley, superstar. He was just a man, my husband." And both book and movie do show, though, that when she was 7 months pregnant, he calls her into his office and he's like, "I've been thinking and we should take a break. We should separate for a while." And she's just like in shock. But in both, she's just like, "Okay, let me know when I should leave." And then she walks off. And then from there, though, like he decides, he changes his mind and he's like, "Oh, like never mind. We don't need to do a trial separation." But in the book, he doesn't actually say never mind. They actually don't talk about it at all. And in the book, it reads, "Within a short time, Elvis's sensitive nature brought him back to his senses. 2 days had passed. The idea of a trial separation was never mentioned again. We both acted as if nothing had been said. It was at times like this I wished Elvis and I had the ability to truly communicate with each other, to confront our insecurities, fears, and frustrations, instead of pretending these feelings weren't there. We probably would have been surprised at how much understanding we both really had. I could not escape the impact his words had on me, leaving me with a sense of doubt." And then after Lisa Marie is born, Elvis will not make love to Priscilla. And in the book, she talks about how close he had been with his mom. And even as an adult, he would like sleep in the same bed with her at times. And in the book, it reads, "When Elvis's mother was alive, they had been unusually close. Elvis even told her about his amatory adventures, and many nights when she was ill, he would sleep with her. All the girls he took out seriously had to fulfill Gladys's requirements of the ideal woman. And as with me, Elvis then put the girl on a pedestal, saving her until the time was sacred and right. He had his wild times, his flings, but any girl he came home to, he had to respect. Now that I was a mother, he was uncertain how to treat me." And then also around this time, Elvis's career, you know, is kind of getting a resurgence. And so she says that she felt like he no longer was interested in spending time at home, where it was so unstimulating compared to like when he would be out performing. And in book and movie, we have a scene where they are doing like a family photo shoot with Lisa Marie when she is a toddler. And Priscilla notices like when she has to take Lisa away from the nanny, Priscilla is crying and she just can't wait to get back to the nanny. And this is like a huge moment for Priscilla where she is like, wow, like she prefers her nanny over her own parents. And in the book we read, "That's when it hit me. My God, she's so attached to the nurse that she doesn't want to leave her. Now I knew I had to find more time to be with her. She had been affected by my own predicament. Busy centering my life around Elvis, even during his absences, I had neglected not only my needs, but my daughter's as well." And this is such a great scene in both book and movie. Like the movie doesn't have any voiceover or anything, and I'm glad it didn't. It didn't need it, obviously. But this scene, like you can so clearly see what is going through Priscilla's mind as they are doing this photo shoot. And like she just sees the relationship with Lisa Marie and how it's not what she wants, right? And so that is a huge turning point for her. And also, like I've heard this before with parents where like the parent is putting up with something, but then once they have a child and they see their child having to put up with that same thing, that's like a waking up moment. And they're like, whoa, like I was willing to treat myself that way, but I will not stand to have my child treated that way too. And it's a turning point for people. So yeah, I just thought that was a great scene in both book and movie. And by the time Priscilla is 28, she and Elvis are just living very separate lives. You know, he's performing in Vegas and also he is just not doing well, you know, mentally and physically, and he's addicted to pills and just sleeping around a ton. Meanwhile, Priscilla is like finally discovering who she is, you know, finally, now that Elvis isn't dictating her life, she's just able to find herself and gain her confidence. And she gets really into karate. And Elvis had been really into karate when she met him. And so when she starts getting into it, he recommends this instructor named Mike. And so she starts working with this karate guy named Mike. And in real life, the two of them start having an affair, but that is not mentioned in the movie. But yeah, in the book we read, martial arts gave me such confidence and assurance that I began to experience my feelings and express my emotions as never before. Accustomed to suppressing my anger, I could honestly vent it now without fear of accusations or explosions. I stopped apologizing for my opinions and laughing at jokes I didn't find amusing. A transformation had begun in which fear and indifference had no place. Along with this new confidence, off came my false eyelashes and heavy makeup, the jewels and flashy clothes, all the devices that I depended upon for security I now shed. I had a chance to observe marriages outside our immediate circle where the woman had just as much say as a man in everyday decisions and long-term goals. I was confronted with the harsh realization that living the way I had for so long was very unnatural and detrimental to my well-being. And so from here, Priscilla goes to see Elvis and she tells him that she is leaving him and leaving their marriage. And he says, like, did I lose you to another man? And she says, like, you lost me to a life of my own, which in the book she had started having an affair with that guy Mike, but she and Elvis like hadn't even been having sex, and the two of them lived such separate lives. And so even though technically she was having an affair, ultimately the bigger thing was that she was just discovering herself and creating her own life and finding out who she was. But anyway, Elvis is just like kind of blindsided by this. He shouldn't have been, but I feel like he was just, used to all the attention being on him that he hadn't considered what she was going through, I think, and what her life was. Anyway, he says something about how, like maybe another time in another life, and she is like, maybe. And then she walks out and she leaves. And the movie, I think, shows how like this was such a hard choice because she still did love and care about him, but she just couldn't stay in a relationship with him anymore. And the movie ends with her like leaving Graceland, driving out as Dolly Parton's I Will Always Love You plays. And the movie doesn't talk about Elvis's death at all, but in the book, when she's reflecting on her life with him, when she finds out he had died, we read, he had been a part of my life for 18 years. When we met, I had just turned 14. The first 6 months I spent with him were filled with tenderness and affection. Blinded by love, I saw none of his faults or weaknesses. He was to become the passion of my life. He taught me everything: how to dress, how to walk, how to apply makeup, and how to wear my hair, how to behave, how to return love his way. Over the years, he became my father, husband, and very nearly God. And when she finds out he has died, like she is stunned by this news. And even though they had been divorced for a few years at this point, they were still very amicable, and he was still present in Lisa Marie's life. So they were still in each other's lives and they still talked fairly regularly. And so she is just like feels so lost now that he has died. And near the end of the book, we read, Elvis's death made me much more aware of my own mortality and that of the people I loved. I realized I'd better start sharing a lot more with the people that I cared about, and every moment that I had with my child or my parents became more precious. I learned from Elvis, often sadly, from his mistakes. I learned that having too many people around can sap your energies. I learned the price of trying to make everyone happy. Elvis would bestow gifts on some, making others jealous, often creating rivalries and anxieties within the group. I learned to confront people and to face issues. 2 steps Elvis had avoided. I learned to take charge of my life. Elvis had been so young when he became a star that he was never able to handle the power and money that accompanied his fame. In many ways, he was a victim, destroyed by the very people who catered to his every want and need. He was a victim, too, of his image. And in the memoir, I thought Priscilla did a great job at like balancing, telling like the dark truth about Elvis, while also showing that she still like loved him and had compassion for him, right? And we see like how he had his own weird family dynamics. And then you have like the people who just leached onto him and like sucked him dry because he was so talented. And then also, like I said, like the doctors who were like pumping him full of all of these pills and whatever just to keep him going, and people who were not encouraging him to live a healthy life, right? And so, he just had so many issues, and it caused him to just be a very emotionally unhealthy person. And he was also just incredibly lonely, right? Like in the book, she talks about how he would always turn the TV on. Like as soon as he walked in a room, he would turn the TV on. And when she asked him why, he said it's because it made him feel like there were people around and that he wasn't lonely. And he would also buy like everything for the people around him in order to keep them around him, like using money to keep people. But also he had this sense of insecurity and like fear of abandonment and loneliness. And so he was just also very controlling, like wanting to control people's actions so that they wouldn't leave him and, keep them around with the money he would spend on them. And also just wanting to be everybody's like number one priority, right? But there's a part in the book when he was really into horses and buying everybody horses and trucks. The book reads, Elvis liked it when everyone was together. On his terms, he alone specified. And he got upset when they wanted to leave. Hell, I bought all this stuff and everyone wants to go home, he would say. He resented defections. He'd given the employees employees everything, and they didn't seem to appreciate it. He discovered that some of the regulars were selling their trucks. They needed the cash more than the El Caminos. Elvis couldn't imagine the financial struggle most people face, and he never understood that the married regulars had to consider responsibilities to their wives and children. So again, just like he wanted to feel secure in knowing that he was everybody's priority and that they would stick around and do what he said. And so he just took it very personal when people had priorities like their wives and kids, right? But also a lot of these people would take advantage of Elvis as well, right? So in general, it just seems like a lot of people in Elvis's life, he just had a lot of unhealthy relationships because, yeah, he would be manipulative and controlling, but they also were just leeching off of him and taking advantage. And then obviously, like with his mom, she definitely seems to have been like emotionally abusive and manipulative, but I kind of wonder like if it ever went further, you know, with like physical abuse or something, which I don't know. I haven't really researched that, but yeah, clearly he had like issues in regards to his mom as well, and then her death when he was still relatively young, and yeah, just a lot of issues there. And the movie shows how Elvis obviously tried to control and did control Priscilla for a long time, again, out of his sense of needing to control her so that he could keep her and so that she wouldn't abandon him, right? And that she would stick around essentially, and that, you know, he could form her into who he wanted her to be. And we see him like gaslighting her constantly and getting angry, obviously, and manipulative. But I felt like we didn't often see like that sadder side of him, right? Which we all know, like Elvis was lonely and sad and depressed a lot of the times. And so I didn't think the movie quite showed that very much. I mean, we see, again, like I said, like we see the allure of him and how charming he was, and we see the sweet moments they have. But yeah, I just didn't think we really saw like why he was so controlling and manipulative and angry, right? Like she never really showed much of that side of him, whereas the book did. And when it comes to book versus movie, so Coppola's movies always have like just such an aesthetic to them, and like just it's such vibes, right? Like her movies just are like such a vibe, and we definitely get that here. And she also like takes her time with the story, like in all of her movies, but specific to Priscilla, like there's so many like quiet moments where we are just like with the characters in this moment, taking our time with it, and I really enjoyed that. However, the pacing was weird because while the first hour we're like taking our time with this relationship and these people, and again just so atmospheric and so aesthetically pleasing, but then like around the time they get married and she gets pregnant, suddenly the story seems to fly by, and then the ending feels kind of abrupt. So I did think the pacing was weird with the movie. However, I did like seeing Priscilla's transformation, and I thought the movie did a pretty good job at just showing how she finally discovers herself, you know, as she finds out who she is without Elvis deciding who she is for her. And I did think the two lead performances were amazing. Like, I forget the actress's name who plays Priscilla, but she was fantastic. And she definitely captured, like I said, that innocence and naivete when she is younger. And then again, as she transforms over time, I thought she did a great job. And Jacob Elordi as Elvis was fantastic, which obviously, like, how have we gotten two amazing Elvis performances in 2 years, right? Because I feel like it's so hard to capture Elvis in a realistic way that's not like trying too hard or that's like cartoonish or something. But he did great. However, I will not have people using this movie as a way to insult Austin Butler's performance, which I have seen multiple people do. Obviously, you can't help but compare them, but these two movies, they might be playing the same man, but the two movies are so different. I feel like it's like not really fair to compare performances. And yeah, on my watch, I will not have anybody insulting Austin Butler because he put his heart and soul into Elvis, and he was fantastic in that movie. And Jacob Elordi is great too, but he's the supporting character here in Priscilla, and it's a very different side of Elvis we're seeing. And yeah, both of them are great. Don't insult Austin Butler because he was amazing. So anyway, but yeah, I was very impressed with Elordi, but like I said, I did wish we saw more of the sadness and more of the complexity and nuance with his character rather than just seeing him, you know, be abusive and manipulative constantly. I mean, like I said, we do see his sweet side and how he was so captivating, but also like, I feel like I need to watch this movie a second time because honestly, the more I think about this, I saw this movie like 2 days ago now, and the more I think about how Coppola did not show these details into Elvis, part of me, initially I was like, oh, it's something that was overlooked, but I think it was actually more intentional than that because one, most people who go into this movie, we are well aware of Elvis's complexities and his issues that he had. So Coppola probably didn't feel the need to show that to the audience because one, this movie is not about Elvis, this movie is about Priscilla, so why distract from the story story by showing us these issues Elvis was having. And also too, we don't need to be shown those things because we already are aware of that, right? So the more I've thought about it, the less I'm bothered by Elvis's quote unquote lack of nuance, because, you know, there is nuance to his character. And again, when people go in to see this movie, Elvis has been the focus for decades. So we all know the details with Elvis, right? Like Coppola doesn't need to tell us all over again. So I actually really like that decision. And I like her decision to not have any Elvis music, which wasn't really a decision. She couldn't, because whoever owns the Elvis music did not approve of this movie and they didn't want his music in the movie. But I feel like that was like a blessing in disguise, because I think hearing his actual songs would have detracted from the story and been too distracting. So I think by not getting into Elvis in a deeper way and not playing his music, we really could focus on Priscilla, who is that's the point of this whole movie, is to see her side of it. But yeah, that's my long-winded tangent on the Elvis portrayal in this movie. The book, we do see more nuance and complexity to him, but the book was also written in the 80s when people probably didn't know as much about Elvis. And yeah, so initially I didn't like that the movie didn't get into that as well, but like the issues he had that caused him to be controlling and manipulative. But yeah, I know I'm kind of repeating myself now, but ultimately I think it was a conscious choice on Coppola's part, or whoever wrote the script, and Coppola. And I actually think it was a good call. But yeah, the book was very readable. It was very accessible. And she says how, like, it's so difficult to condense my relationship with Elvis into, a 250-page book, but she did the best she could. And yeah, again, I thought she just did a great job at, sharing these insightful stories into her life with him, while also showing the love that she has always had for him, while also showing, the courage she had to, one, become a more present mother for Lisa Marie, to have that epiphany where she was like, wow, like I need to be around her more. And two, the courage she had to officially leave the marriage with Elvis. And so it is just a fantastic story. And I just really loved both book and movie. I think if you've read the book, you should definitely go see the movie. I do not think you will be disappointed. And when it comes to book versus movie, initially I was going to say the book because of us seeing more into Elvis and his issues. However, like I said, the more I think about it, I like Coppola's decision and how he was portrayed. Not that the movie would have hurt by showing his depression and his mental health issues, but they do kind of show it. It's not like they don't. I mean, and there's also details in the book that obviously didn't make it into the movie. I mentioned a few of them, but there's, many more stories in the book. I will be watching the movie again sooner than I will be reading the book again. So part of me thinks I should say the movie if that's the one I will be returning to. But I did really like the book and I would highly recommend it. So this is tough. Initially, when I wrote this up, I said the book, but now I'm thinking maybe the movie. So I'm just going to say the movie. The movie wins. I thought it was a great adaptation, a great story, and I love that Priscilla Presley's story is being told, so I highly recommend it. And yeah, thank you guys for watching this video. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. If you have seen this movie, what you thought of it, if you hated it, if you loved it. Let me know your thoughts on the Elvis movie from last year, which I did love. It's a very surface level story. Like, we don't get much depth into Elvis's life in the movie Elvis from 2022, but I still loved it. And Austin Butler is fantastic. And the performance scenes are like so good, especially when he's in Vegas. So I highly recommend the movie Elvis. But yeah, let me know your thoughts and we can chat about Elvis and Priscilla down in the comments, and Sofia Coppola, which if you want more Sofia Coppola content, I have covered The Beguiled. I talk about the book, the movie from the 70s, and then the Sofia Coppola adaptation. So go ahead and check that video out. I will link to it on the screen. And again, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Do not forget to subscribe if you have not already, and I will see you next time. Bye.